Hello and welcome to another My NT marriage video. And in this video I wanted to talk about insults. Is it tactlessness or verbal abuse? When I first found out my husband was on the spectrum and that Asperger's people can tend to be blunt and just say it like it is, my first thought was, oh, that explains it. This is why he's saying the things that he's saying. However, I've since spoken to other people who have partners who are neurodiverse, and their partners aren't saying the things that my husband is saying. So then that's made me wonder, is he doing it because he's on the spectrum, or is he doing it for some other reason? I'm really not sure. There's 3 different insults that he does. One are the just tactless, I haven't thought about anything before I spoke, random things. Others are said because they're home truths, that's what he calls them. And he thinks that they're things that all partners are allowed to say to each other and are saying to each other and should say to each other. And then the third one is those kind of stab to the gut remarks that he makes, and he has this kind of satisfying grin on his face when he knows that, you know, it's hurt. So they're the 3 that I've noticed, and perhaps some of them are Aspie traits and some of the insults are just because he is who he is. Let me know what you think below. So with that being said, I'm going to dive right in to many of the really crappy, yucky, awful things that he said over the years. And keep in mind as I read this list, we've been together for 24 years, and I don't know how many insults there are on this list. Let's say there's 32, for example. That's averaging out to 1 and a bit per year, so it's not overwhelming in a sense, if you get what I'm saying. It's just that some of them, as I'm sure you'll understand when you hear them, are just so hard to hear that they're really hard to forgive and forget and get over and move on from. So let us begin. When we first met, I would do that typical thing of where you share a story about your past because you're including them in your world and who you are and, you know, all the things that you've done and that kind of stuff. And he would say, "Stop boasting." And I was like, oh, okay, that's an unusual response. What does he mean? And he just meant that if I was telling a story about, you know, something wonderful that had happened or some cool thing that I'd done, he considered that boasting. Interesting concept. He started to say from that point on, "You're not as good as you think you are. Someone needs to pull you off that pedestal you've put yourself on." If I made a mistake, like let's say, classic example, when I met him, he used jar sauce. And I said to him that I make sauce, spaghetti bolognese for example, from scratch. I don't use jar sauce. So according to him, that's me boasting, you know. That's me saying, your jar sauce sucks, I'm better than you because I cook from scratch. I can see where he's coming from now that I sort of look back at it in hindsight. And so then when I cooked, let's say I overcooked the pasta, he would instantly be like, "See, you're not as good as you think you are." You know, and I was like, it's a very interesting way you have of seeing things there. He told me that Pete Murray's song, "So Beautiful," reminded him of me because, and I quote, and I would love to bring you down and plant your feet back on the ground. That relates to the boasting comment that I made earlier. Another song he dedicated to me was the Robbie Williams song, Sexed Up, where there's a line that he says, "Why do you always doubt that there can be a better way? It doesn't make me want to stay." And that relates to the recommendations that he was always making, and me saying, "Thank you for your recommendation. I'm going to keep doing it my way." He called me a nag. He told me I was too clingy, I was too needy, that he has no interest in the things that I want to discuss. My primary interest is human nature, psychology, human development, all those kinds of things. You know, welfare of people, welfare of children, welfare of animals, those kinds of topics, and they were not of an interest to him. He said in the early days, one of the reasons he doesn't flirt with me is because I wear too much black. But when I started wearing other colours, of course that didn't change. Right from the beginning, for some particular reason, and when I say right from the beginning, I mean once I moved in with him and I was in his place for 3 years, he started to tell me that he'd settled for me, that he had just gone with the first girl that looked at him sideways and that was me, and so he was settling for me. And I have to admit, that was pretty hard to hear, you know, because I didn't feel like I was that terrible that one would settle for me, you know. And he'd been single for so long before I met him. When he had girlfriends and things, but they hadn't stayed because he was so cold and distant. And so he was struggling to hold on to girlfriends. So when I came along, I thought that he would like cherish me because, you know, it was like finally somebody cares enough to stay. But alas, his view on that was that he just settled for me and was just tolerating me because he found having me there as a girlfriend just so hard to deal with, because he was just so used to being on his own, and all of a sudden there was this extra person creating extra demands. After I gave birth to our first son, it was pretty painful. Anybody who has had a baby would tell you it's pretty awful. I have a fairly low pain tolerance. I get really annoyed when women say to me, "Oh, I didn't need any, you know, injections or painkillers or blah 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 blah," and I'm like, "That's nice, dear. Get back in your box chocolate." I'm not like you. I'm like, give me the gas, bring it on. It's awful to me. Labour goes on and on, it's painful. It's like somebody standing on your hips and moving and rocking. That's what it feels like. Anyway, at the end of that, he says to me, "I thought you would have done a better job." Like, as opposed to what? As opposed to, oh, the other women you've ever seen give birth? I don't know. But that was pretty hard to hear at the time. I mean, I've just given birth and that's what he says, and I'm like, I felt a bit sorry for myself. And about 6 months after I gave birth, he said some wacko thing about thinking I'd have bounced back quicker, body-wise. And I've seen photos of myself at this stage and I just think, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. There was nothing wrong with me, but just makes these random statements, you know, just plant that little seed of doubt. Obviously, because of the whole housework saga, he would say things like, "You're lazy and you sit around all day eating donuts." And I would say to him, "Donuts? Where are these donuts you speak of? I see no donuts." And it's not because I ate them. There were no donuts. He was just crazy, just saying whatever. And obviously from the food video, you'll know that he was often asking me, "Should you be eating that?" So he'd go up the street and bring something back, and then if I ate it, something naughty, and if I ate it, he would say, "Should you be eating that?" And I was like, "Should you be buying that?" But let's be fair. We went lingerie shopping and I tried on the lingerie when we got home, and his response was, it looked better on the dummy. And I remember thinking, is that because he thinks the dummy is skinnier than me and he thinks I'm fat? You know, I mean, we interpret all manner of things into something that somebody says. But later on he admitted that the colour on me didn't look as good as the dummy because the dummy was tanned and I'm pale. So yeah, it wasn't intended the way that I had thought it was at the time. He said, other women are more provocative than me. I don't dress sexy enough. You should meet my cousin. She's so beautiful she could be a model. I thought you'd be jealous of her, some lady he was crushing on, because she's prettier than you. That one there has been particularly hard to get over because at the time I hadn't thought that that woman that he was crushing on was prettier than me. I hadn't thought of it at all. It was just a person and I was just getting on with my world. And so when he said that, I was really crushed. I would say that was one of those comments that took me years and years and years to get over, if indeed I'm even over it. He also told me that she's got a better bum than me, and I was most offended by that because she had one of those flat bottoms, and I was like, oh, Jesus. He's told me that he thinks of sex when he sees other attractive ladies up the street, and that's one of those thoughts that I'm thinking, yeah, you can keep that one to yourself, you don't have to say that. He's told me he doesn't think about me during the day, and he's told me on occasions when I've gone away that he doesn't miss me or didn't miss me. Of course he's told me I talk too much. I probably do. Obviously, as you know from previous videos, he's told me that many family members of his have told me that they've noticed I've gained weight. That's always good to hear. He used to tell me not to post stuff on Facebook. He would tell me what I could and couldn't post or get angry if I posted certain things. And he didn't want me posting photos of him and I together, which I found incredibly sus, I have to admit. I was like, why would you not want me to share that? That's so unusual. And with regards to Facebook, whatever I posted on there, he would say that his friends found me a bit much. And that was mostly to do with sort of equality and things like that. That sort of thing that I post about. And so some of the just more random tactless things that he says is that we'll just be talking and he'll say, oh, your teeth are yellow. That's nice, dear. Or he'll say, what's the matter with your chin? And I'm like, what is the matter with my chin? And one time he said, I can see cellulite in that photo. And I was like, oh, God. I hadn't even thought about that. And he wasn't even talking about like my bottom. It was an arm and it had like shadow. And I was like, oh, I mean, I was not liking the photo at all to begin with. And then he goes and just adds that little bit of information in there, you know, because clearly I missed it. Oh, he tells me I'm not organised as well. That one really annoys me because I'm highly organised. When I was a professional temp prior to my having children and stopping work, that was one of the things that I was renowned for. I could go into an office and just revamp and set up systems and all these other kinds of things. And that was one of the things that was my skill set. And so when he tells me that I'm not organised, I just think, compared to who? A 1-year-old? He told me he's never liked me enough to meet my needs. This goes back to the meeting needs video. And he also said that he'd respect me more if I'd achieved something with myself. And by that he means that because I stopped working and I'm now a stay-at-home mum and I have a stay-at-home business which doesn't bring in the bacon, he considers that failure to some degree because I'm not raking in the money. So it's just that his idea of achieving is different to mine. But I really, you know, I mean, that was just so hard to hear him say that. because I don't consider that I'm that much of a loser, that I'm worthy of disrespect because of that, if you understand what I'm saying. So there isn't a lot about me that he hasn't had stabs at, and there were a few things that were still left. Prior to meeting him, sort of more in my teenage, early adult years, I used to do theatre work, and that included musicals and things like that, where I would have to sing and dance. And there was one time we were watching telly, and he just turns to me and he says, "Sorry babe, but you can't sing." And I just remember just thinking, why would you say that? Like, what was your intention? And then I looked at his face and he was grinning, and I realised it was one of those random remarks that he'd said because he'd been trying to hurt me. Because what he does is, sometimes I'll say something not particularly awful. So for example, one of my children was singing, and I said, "Oh wow, you can sing, you take after your mother," you know. And I'm not saying that he sucks because the child takes after me. I'm not saying your dad can't sing because you take after your mother who can. That was not what I meant. But it must have been how he took it. And so weeks and weeks later, like, he saved it up. He remembered it and waited for this random opportunity. And then says, "Sorry babe, you can't sing," as a way of paying me back for that earlier comment. And when I was upset by it, he grinned. And that was when I knew that he'd said it out of spite. And this is the random thing that he does. Like I said, he's got these 3 different reasons for saying the things that he says. And I just remember in that moment, and that wasn't that long ago, that was probably about 4 years ago. I remember in that moment, something died. Like, the love for him that I had just kind of crumbled in that moment, because I realised that he tried to hurt me, and I just thought, that's a new low. That's really awful. Like, why would you do that? And then on top of that, I used to dance, and I would even dance for him, you know, do a little bit of a striptease and bits and pieces like this. And then one day he just says, "I don't care for your dancing." I was like, oh. And the reason it was so crushing was because the dancing and the singing were like the 2 last things that he hadn't insulted, and then all of a sudden he had. And then to make matters worse, we're talking on the phone weeks later, and he says, "Oh, I love your dancing. I noticed you've stopped dancing. I wish you'd dance for me again." And I was like, triggered, you know. Anybody who's been triggered will understand what I'm saying there, when somebody says something like that and you're instantly like, I was so confused. I was like, hang on a minute. You said you didn't care for my dancing, but now you're saying you wish I would dance for you. What? Like, what is going on? And I haven't danced for him since. He's kind of killed that mood. And this is the thing, like, I don't think he realises when he says stuff that damage is done, damage that can't be undone. So I don't think that he understands that you can't just say whatever the frick you want and all will be well. And so some of the things, as I've mentioned, are just random sayings that I think, yeah, you probably should have thought about that before you spoke. But other things are just so cutting, and I wonder to myself, how can he say them and not know that they're going to do damage, that they're going to hurt the relationship in a major way? So yeah, anyway, that's the insults that he said over the years. He has said nice things, however, which is, you know, good. It's a nice offset. He told me that he liked my style that time that we went out to one of his work dues and I'd had a dress made. He's told me recently that I'm a good mum, and I'm just going to interject here again and say that the majority of these compliments are happening within the last 4 years because something has changed with him. I'm not sure if it's to do with the fact that he's now got firefighting buddies he hangs with and talks with and he's learning from them. I'm not sure if it's things the counsellors have been saying. I'm not sure if it's after he said that you can't sing remark and I was gutted, if that made him have a sort of a turnabout. But either way, in the last 4 years, he's started to compliment me more than he'd ever had before. And so these compliments I'm telling you now are recent developments. He told me he likes my curves, which was nice. I mean, it's sweet, but at the same time slightly triggering because, again, he's been putting my body down. He's been telling me that other people notice that I'm fat and should you be eating that and all these kind of negative comments about my body image. And then he says, I like your curves. And there's a part of me that thinks, oh, that's nice, you know, and then there's this other part of me is like, I don't understand. Was what you were saying before your truth? Or is this your truth? Or does your truth change? Like, you don't like my body and then you do? Like, is this how it goes? And that makes no sense to me anyway, because why would you not like my body how it was in the early days where I was toned and strong and slim and fit and healthy, and then now that I'm not, you like my body? I don't know. I can't get my head around it. If you have any thoughts, feel free to share because it confuses me. And he said that I'm getting better looking as I get older, which I thought was super adorable. I completely disagree. I think most people do. Most people look at their youthful photos and reminisce and wish that we could stay young forever. But it's nice that he said that. I really liked that he thought to say that. And randomly he just said to me once, oh, I notice you don't have a lot of cellulite. And I was like, oh, that's cool. That's really awesome. Because I can't see the back of me. I have no idea. But that was nice of him to say that. It was an ego boost. And there was one time I was working and singing and listening to music, and he said, I love watching you work while you're singing and listening to music. I thought that was pretty sweet. He tells me that I look nice now prior to going on dates. For years we'd go on dates and he'd say absolutely nothing. You know, you'd doll yourself up and he's like, eh. But now he's starting to tell me that I look nice prior to dates, which again is nice to hear. And he'll often compliment me down the track for something that happened. So I might wear an outfit 2 days ago and then he'll say to me, I like that outfit you had on 2 days ago. So at the time he doesn't say anything. He's probably not thinking to say something. But later on he'll remember that he wanted to say something and he'll say, I like that outfit you wore later on. So again, this is a new development. He's starting to comment in that regard as well, which is also nice because I used to wonder, you know, if he's not saying anything about what I'm wearing, does he like what I'm wearing? And so that's most of it, the insults and the compliments. And you can probably tell that the insults outweigh the compliments. Keep in mind, I haven't added all of the critiquings and fault findings and things. I'm just talking specifically about random statements that he's made. And so they definitely outweigh the good parts, but at least there are some good parts. The hardest part for me is, how do I move forward? That's really the thing that I struggle with the most. Like, I assume that he's not being malicious. I assume that he's not trying to be nasty. I assume that because he has Asperger's that these things are just tactless things that he just says without thinking, and yet they kind of stick in you a little bit. And not so much that I hate myself for the things that he has said. Like, it's not making me feel shit about who I am. It's making me feel negative towards him. Like, if I had a bucket full of love when we met, all of those insults just took out of the bucket, if you get my drift, and then on the odd occasion he'd do a compliment, and so you can see how that bucket just depleted. So it's kind of like that, it's like a depletion. So it's not that I really dislike him or hate him or think that he's evil or vile or anything like that, but it does change and alter how I feel about him. It makes me sort of have less love or less loving feelings. So I'll still be respectful to him, I'll still be kind to him, I'll still be nice to him, I'll never mistreat him, I don't put him down and attack him and things like this. Not that I never have, I'm sure I have on occasion, but not the way that he does with me. But I would never be awful to him. It's just that I find it within myself hard to grapple with this. It's just my own personal struggle, or our own personal struggle, that this relationship has brought to the table. Anyway, that's compliments versus insults, tactlessness or deliberate insults. What do you think? Let me know by commenting below, and thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video. I really appreciate it.